Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
With the digitization of marketing, a lot has changed within marketing departments over the last 10, 15 years. And we dig into that today with Esther Benzie, talking about, how some channels are performing, what performance marketing means, what's happening in content production. There's a lot of great content in here. Hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Mark Binkley and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
All right, well, welcome back to the show. We've got Esther Benzie on the show today, a senior marketing executive, formerly the VP of Brand and Advertising at CIBC, and a VP of Brand Operations at P&G, a board member of the Association of the Canadian Advertisers. And Esther, we're so excited to have you on the show.
Well, thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
This is going to be awesome.
This is great. So you and I met a couple months ago. We started chatting about lots of things. One of which was this growing sort of tension and trends that are happening within marketing departments. Kind of a polarization that's almost happening within marketing. And so you're either for brand or for performance, or you're either with Team Digital or you're against us. You're either a specialist or you're an advocate of generalization. And so there's all these kinds of push-pull things happening in marketing. And we really are just wanting to kind of use your experience and your insights and kind of have a conversation and deep dive into that. So yeah, super excited about this conversation. You, as I mentioned, managed some big brands like CIBC and all the ones at P&G that you were managing. Could you just share a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are?
Sure, happy to. I actually started my marketing career in fundraising. So I worked in the not-for-profit sector for a few years. And I called it my time of selling good feelings, because I was actually working for an association where most of the people I was raising money from weren't benefiting from the services that we were providing. So it was a great experience and a first intro really into marketing. But at a point I decided I love that combination of running a business and understanding what the consumer was thinking. And so that's when I went to P&G.
Mm-hmm.
And like many, thought I was going for a couple of years to get my P&G experience. And then 23 years later, I was still there.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was I worked across, pretty much every brand, big brands like Tide and Crest, launched new businesses, tried all sorts of new different types of marketing. It was one of those first shopper marketers, that type of stuff. So it was just great. I mean, P&G is an amazing company to be a marketing in. Mm-hmm. And then 5 years ago, or almost 6 now, had the chance to move to CIBC to relaunch the CIBC brand here in Canada. Mm-hmm. And as you know, for Canadians, there's not that many times where you can do such a big brand relaunch here in the market. No. And so it was a really an incredible opportunity to work for a leading Canadian brand in the head office and try a different industry.
Yeah.
So that's my career. And then, now I call it my rewiring phase. So I left CIBC in December, and now I'm doing some consulting for the Association of Canadian Advertisers, where I was previously a board, and doing a course and looking at a bunch of different marketing consulting ideas around the areas that I find most interesting in marketing.
Super cool. Yeah, P&G is one of those places I feel like it's almost like, on the sales side, you talk about people that have gone through the Xerox program. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're they're really good. They learn how to sell. And so I feel like that's the same for P&G too.
Yeah, I think a lot of consumer packaged goods companies are like that. And I often say that to when young people come and ask me advice about getting started in marketing. I think it's such a great grounding, because it does teach you the how to run a business, which I think is part of what has been a little bit lost in marketers today, where everybody's so focused on the tactic that they've actually forgotten how does a brand make money, or what are all the other factors that can help a brand grow.
Yeah.
And so it was really great at helping build those skills.
That's an interesting tension we didn't intro at the beginning either.
Yeah.
doing marketing things versus doing business things. Like that's also interesting.
I think the other thing on the consumer goods side is it teaches you speed and operating with speed, operating with, like sometimes it's speed over perfection, right? And I think it really gets you comfortable in that state where a lot of us will find ourselves in some point in our careers where it's, as much as it doesn't matter how methodical you may be at times, something's going to come. It's going to be a curveball, a direct ask from ELT, something. And
Yeah.
just learning to operate in that environment is so important. I think consumer goods does a great job of that.
Yeah, they do. And a lot of it's driven by the fact that so much of the business is sold, through retailers who are driving, that speed, right?
Totally.
There'll be something that happens within a retailer or a new ask that you didn't anticipate that will cause you to have to change and think differently about how you're thinking about the business. So, and I worked a lot in beauty as well, where obviously trends are huge.
Yeah.
Is it going to be a lip year? Is it going to be an eye year? Like what are some of those fashion trends? And you really had to adjust and change based on what some of the industry trends were.
That's funny. I never really thought about that. That's crazy. Yeah.
Stuff we don't think about, Mark.
Well,
yeah.
I'm going to start to. Oh, my kids. Speaking of which, my kids are so into like facial stuff right now. It's like skincare is everything for them. Like my daughter's 11. She's got a little mini fridge for all of her tinctures and creams and stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty wild that there's a lot of TikTok trends on that about getting the right skincare regime, and
it's nuts.
I think when I was that age, it was soap, if that.
Yeah.
Okay.
V.
Go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, well, I wanted to step into a time machine.
Yeah.
And I wanted to take Esther back to about, circa 2012. Facebook goes live. Digital is on the rise. And there's just this groundswell of sentiment that digital channels are going to solve all our problems. Like we now know how to measure. We know how to target. My goodness, marketing has never been better. Now, with the benefit of that 15-year hindsight, what influence, good or bad, did the digitization of marketing actually have to marketing departments, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and it's actually hard to believe it was that long ago. But I think from a positive, it did get us to move faster. You mentioned CPG being a fast industry, but when I first started in marketing, it was you came up with your brand plan once a year, and yes, you adjusted throughout, but it was a 30-second ad. It was maybe a print ad. I mean, I think when social media came in, it encouraged a level of speed that was really interesting.
Yeah.
You no longer spent that full year sweating an ad. I also think it allowed us to be part of culture. You probably remember the Oreo example, the Super Bowl blackout. That was early in the days of social media. And, that was one that I think a lot of marketers aspired to be part of. I remember setting up a news desk at P&G where we would do social listening to try and, have, how can you get into culture in those ways? So I think that was interesting. It also helped with testing and measurement, and I think people became, it allowed you to try things and fail or try things and succeed because you had some clear measurements. So those are some of the positives, but there were lots of negatives too. So for me, some of the negatives were things like I think creative storytelling has really become a lot more negative because of that. You saw a lot of generic ads. I mean, I'm sure you guys can think of many. So that's one piece. The other issues like brand safety, brand privacy, viewability, all those things, those weren't talked when you were doing a TV ad. And probably the thing I hate the most about that period is the term "go viral," because how many of us after we want that go viral idea, right? And I mean, 10 years later, you're still getting asked that. How do I make this go viral?
Totally.
We have a button on our keyboard, so that's how we fix that problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The go
exactly.
viral.
Yeah, the go viral trend. But yeah, it's so there were definitely some positives, and but I think some of the things that it caused, it definitely isn't the panacea for all marketing, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I think that to me is what all these tensions demonstrate, is that they are tensions because truly you need a bit of both, right? And
You
sometimes
do.
it's going to be more one way, and sometimes it's going to be more another way.
Do you like on the creative side of things? Could you see that happening in the moment, or is it now just with time and perspective and a retrospective view that you're like, yeah, we kind of veered off course there?
I'd say I didn't see it at the moment. I think there was so much. I mean, if you think about it, those first ads they were not video creative, right? They would be, just
Static image, kind of thing.
yeah, static image, right? And
Yep.
so, I think at the time that, you were comparing it versus a billboard or a print ad as print was coming down and you didn't realize that. But over time, as more video came in, I think that's when the storytelling really got lost and where viewability also became more of an issue, right? Because you were only watching those first few seconds. And you were dealing with sound off for a long time
Yeah.
until sound came back on, and
Yeah.
you're looking on a different screen size. I mean, there was just so many factors that played in. So maybe some others saw it as they were going along. For me, it was a little bit more looking back than really anticipating it at the time.
Yeah. I remember
Another,
like being in media sales, sorry, V,
no.
and selling against print for a while, like before this, time machine that we just jumped in. Even before that, before Facebook.
Yeah.
And so I remember selling against print and saying, well, you've got all these newspapers that are just sitting at the foot of people's like offices and buildings. And I mean, they're counting those as impression. They're counting that as distribution, but they're just sitting there. Nobody's seeing it. And so that was like one of those things where for me, there was a connection to the non-viewable impression, which sounds so ridiculous to say that.
Yeah.
But we just never measured those kinds of things before.
No, we didn't. Or you assumed a certain amount of that in your numbers, right? But I think it, I think what ended up happening. I was on a business once on Tide actually, where they did some testing where they showed that the static image really did nothing for the business at the time. So they didn't do a lot of digital until the video storytelling became more prevalent, and there were the types of media choices to allow for that. So, I think that it's been a pretty interesting development over time, and even now, you think yourself, right? I went to see Fall Guy last night at the theater. And, you're sitting in there. Of course, you're watching the ads, right? You're so involved. You're seeing it on a big, beautiful screen. The amount of storytelling you can tell in that versus, I mean, Mark, your kids are probably the same. My kids just want to skip that video ad or pay for ad blockers because they don't want that to interrupt their viewing experience digitally. And so, I think that's the challenge we face now, is just how do you still capture that storytelling and tell those interesting stories so that they don't skip over it or they don't try and shut it down. And it is harder to do in a digital environment.
The only thing I wanted to contribute to this conversation is I think the digital or the digitization of advertising really took us down a path. And again, this is with the power of hindsight more than anything, is really kind of thinking about content a lot differently. So, the short form content that, I think when you think about the first iterations of video is basically repurposing what you had on TV. So you talked about the 30 seconds to 60 seconds. Then all of a sudden that time started becoming, now it's 15 seconds. Now it's 7 seconds. Now it's like, if you haven't captivated the audience the first second, then it's not even worth it. Like, it's all those things that I think led to what you were talking about, like the creative decay, if you will, where everyone was prioritizing speed and chasing, or became spreadsheet ninjas to say, well, here's the impressions that went now, here are the clicks we generated. We good. Yeah. High five. Let's go. But in reality, I think the creative storytelling did suffer quite immensely, which allows us now in retrospect, and you would have heard the story around Adidas, They moved away from the performance branding side completely. What was the other one? Airbnb, I think did that more recently as well. And I think we're in this time of a almost like a reckoning. It's like now we're going back to some of the basics, the beautiful basics of marketing. And I think it's at like our generation, we've kind of seen it kind of come full circle, and it's kind of incredible.
It's true, and I mean, it speaks a little too, though. I think what's gonna have to happen to help rebalance it is also rebalance the talent.
Yes.
We've talked about
Great
generalists
point.
versus specialists, and that tension. And unfortunately, a lot of marketing organizations are primarily specialists now, and
100%.
I know you shared that study through the Swedish Advertisers, and it's certainly the trends that I'm seeing as well, and saw in my last job.
Yeah.
Just the amount of specialists that were there.
Yeah, it was interesting looking at that. So just as a reference, we'll put that link in, but there's a study by the Association of Swedish Advertisers. It's a Swedish name, I guess, fair near average, something. Now it's French Swedish. Anyway, and Capero. And so we had them on before, and it was really interesting listening to that because they were looking at just Sweden on its own and trying to understand what was happening, what was changing. But your point was, for them, one of the things they found was that there are more and more and more specialists in a marketing department, more and more of them saying, oh, I've got a ROAS. I need more money. Like, look at this. I'm putting $1 in, I'm getting 4 back, or whatever the number is. And each one of them optimizing their own channels to say, I'm getting you these returns, but not looking at the general optimization of the campaigns in holistic kind of viewpoint. And so you have all these people that become super specialized in the things they're doing without seeing the bigger picture of what's actually happening in the business. Like, oh yeah, by the way, you guys are claiming we have 100 sales, but we actually only have 5.
Yeah.
So is your ROAS right? You know what I mean? And there's all kinds of really interesting things like that. And so it's interesting hearing you say that you're seeing it on your end as well. I mean, certainly we saw it when we were working together, V and I, when we were working together.
Yeah, it made me think about it. And, in my last role at CIBC, I would say probably 2/3 of the marketing organization would have been specialists. So, whether it was direct marketers who were focused just on that, whether it was internal agency people, whether it was, media specialists doing, paid, hands-on keyboard type folks.
Mm-hmm.
If I compare that versus, a decade ago, it would have been maybe 10% specialists, right? And I think that to your point, Mark, I think what you lose is that connection to the business and to the overall objectives that you have, and I think you also lose the ability to develop talent and grow them, because if you have such a narrow view of the business, like let's say I am I'm a social media specialist or a search specialist, it's going to be really hard for me to do a marketing strategy that has multiple touch points, or do innovation on a new brand, or do a pricing strategy, or do all those other pieces of marketing that many of us generalists learned how to do. So, I think it's a tricky dynamic, because the specialists definitely contribute and it's important, but I don't think we're doing enough cross-learning and cross-sharing and encouraging people to go in and out of specialist career to broaden their skill set to be able to be the next CMO.
That's super interesting.
That is interesting. And I think there's an interesting dynamic with maybe we can call it the over-specialization of a lot of the marketing disciplines, but I know there was the big shift. When you think about what we all collectively started, there was a lot of prioritization on the agency, your agency partner, how they were going to help you, reach that next level. Then there's almost like this point in time around like that 2012 era where it's all of a sudden it's like, we can do it better than the agency.
Yeah.
And then there was this internalization movement of a lot of those specialized skill sets on an ad tech side. And I think that also probably accelerated that specialization than maybe we had originally anticipated, where now you talk to many, think about like Loblaws, Walmart, they've become like media partners now. Like you can go buy media on their platform. So of course, like you need those specializations. So it's really interesting that and obviously agencies now find themselves in a state of redefining what they do and how they do it and how they accommodate this. So it's a really, really interesting shift in thinking, because the specialization also helps them stay closer to the business if you internalize it. So then speed to market becomes more important. How can we make adjustments on the fly? We don't need the 14-day SLAs that exist, say, with our agencies. So it's a really, I don't know. And I don't know where I'm at on all of that, to be honest with you. It feels like I shift every week, but
it is, and marketing organizations need to continue to redefine themselves, and that's some of the work that the Association of Canadian Advertisers is doing, is to help companies figure out what is that right model for them.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we should have the problem with us marketers is we like those pendulum shifts, right? So it's like, let's go to performance, let's go back to brand, let's go to specialists, let's go back to generalists. I'm not suggesting that we should all be generalists, but I do think you need that balance, and I agree. You need internalizing resources. Like I saw a lot of benefit when I was running our internal paid media team or our internal agency, but I wouldn't have my internal agency do my creative big idea and my big television campaign. They were great at doing certain pieces of work and could do that quickly and efficiently. But I needed a good agency to really push the thinking and the creativity. And I think that's where we've got to be okay with balance and not feel like one way is the right way. And I think we've lost some of that nuance across the industry.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that too, because there's this, we talked about the, all these individual channel owners saying, I'm getting this ROAS. And so you get this idea of one-to-one performance marketing. And somebody else, I can't remember who it was we were talking to, like performance marketing was the best brand job ever.
The best branding. Ethan Decker.
Oh yeah. So, because it almost repositioned branding as not performance.
I know, right? Like, because all of us like doing not performing work, right? Like,
so so there was a shift away from brand kind of type of activities, and to your point around the agencies and that big sort of thinking and that big work kind of idea is the big idea. Is there any reason that why you see that shift? So maybe that's not the right way to say it. What's causing that shift, and is it coming back, and what's causing that?
Well, I think that the shift was started by a few different things. We've talked about Facebook coming in. I mean, just the tools, right? The digital tools and what they were selling against, what really pushed that immediacy and that short-term measurability. I saw a lot in companies I was in, the quarterly financial pressure driving it, right? We wanted to see the immediacy of the return on our marketing. And for brand advertising, there wasn't the same kind of consistency of measurement, right? I mean, yes, you have MMMs, you have brand metrics, but those feel a little bit soft. But I think what ended up happening was people were just like, they were kind of clinging on to, here's something that I can prove delivers business super quickly and I'll be good, right? And in a targeted way. But, as what I find really interesting is when you look at the big digital companies, right? The Amazons, the Googles, they do brand marketing, right? Because they recognize that you need to do that you need to, build that mental availability, build that breadth and reach, because that's how you're going to get new users or grow categories or do those things. I always joke that I knew about Pampers before I had a baby, right?
Totally.
And you didn't wait to get that ad, right? And so I think that's what the type of stuff that brand can do, is it can help get into your consideration set before you even know that you have a consideration set.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, and it's interesting because it's almost like the channel, like Google, Facebook, at the time of that, was really, I mean, they're the two big ones. Amazon's probably in that category now, and probably some of the retail media outlets. But they're almost we're so fascinated by the tech, and then Google and Facebook saying, here's how marketing works now, that we kind of get caught up and swept away in that. And now, like one-to-one and personalization and retargeting and ROAS and all those kinds of things. And look, you can do all this, you just need to measure it. And so then there's a whole thing around measurement, but now you're looking at, the death of cookies happening. Yeah. Facebook has recently, in the last couple of years, started publishing stuff around, actually brand metrics work. Reach actually is a big thing. And so they've almost, by their own design, are starting to, and LinkedIn has been a big one and proponent of this idea as well, but these channels are almost educating marketers and shifting us from going from one end of the spectrum to the other, like ditch to ditch.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember, probably it was about 2 years ago, we were trying to convince our partners at CIBC. I had partners on everyday banking, so checking accounts. And, obviously CIBC branded work, probably no surprise to you guys, really helped grow checking accounts, right? It's your first way into a bank. So, if you're advertising the brand or you're thinking about a bank account and you know about a particular bank, then it makes sense that branded work would be there. And, we were having a lot of debate of whether we should do, lower funnel advertising or branded advertising to help drive the everyday banking accounts. And it was actually Google who was pushing for us to do more brand work because it was getting a better return. Right. I mean, it helps on your, generic search is way more expensive than branded search, right? So if I know the brand and I'm searching by the brand, then my search costs are down. If I, they also saw the benefit of, through the lower funnel, that when I pulled off brand, my lower funnel advertising wasn't as effective. And so, I think those types of that, I would also say the cynic in me would say that maybe they're also pushing for more of the TV dollars to come over. But, now, right? The optimist in me would say everybody's recognizing that balance is important and that it's not, we're not, what's that phrase that, if you only have a hammer, everything is a nail. But I think as marketers, we have more tools in our toolkit, and depending on the business objective and marketing challenge you're facing, we need to use different tools, and a good combo of brand and performance can really make a difference.
Yeah.
So what do you think though in behind all this? Because there was a point of real contention between brand and performance. It felt like everything kind of, and by the way, full transparency, like I'm by trade a performance marketer, right? Like that's I have a job because this discipline exists. So but there was a point where it became really us versus them internally, and it felt like the business really skewed on the performance side because the perception was, and again, this is in hindsight, that we were a lot closer to the data. But what else do you think was actually fueling that finger pointing at that time?
Well, I touched on this. I think the proximity of the data definitely helped. You had the big players pushing for it, that, the Facebooks, the Googles, the experts pushing for it. So I think that made a difference. I think, if I'm a CFO and I have the tangible data and I can see the sale, that makes a difference. So I there was a lot in favor of what we call performance marketing, and I think all those things factored in. The challenge is that that last click attribution is that, right? And you didn't know all the other things that led to it. Did I walk past a storefront? Did I did a friend tell me about it? I mean, my belief is that a lot of performance marketers were taking credit for work that wasn't performance marketing, right? They were getting results from other factors that were also helping to drive the business. And I think by just focusing on those last clicks, by just focusing, in banking, they love to just focus on an e-commerce sale. Well, but we do a ton of sales in banking centers too, right? So how do you factor that in? So I think all those things had an impact.
It's kind of like, sorry, go ahead, V.
Sorry, I just did want to say I have seen the light. So
okay, good. I wouldn't be here if you had.
I have seen the light. So yes, of course.
Yeah, it's
Go ahead.
You and other brands, right? I mean, if you think of
Yeah.
like, brands like Nike, or, if you said to, Apple brand is dead, they would,
They'd
they would
laugh you
laugh at
out.
you, right?
yeah. It's funny, the hammer and nail thing comes back to me as you're describing that last click attribution. Like, if 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 that's what your hammer, like everything, every ad looks like a nail. Like you're
Yeah.
really just looking
Yeah.
at the last click, and then going back to the early part of our conversation, you're a specialist. You're looking at like such a small and little minute part of the whole process. You're not really considering all the other things, which is limiting.
No. Like, yeah, I mean, if you're really, and maybe this is one of the things that has been lost throughout this, is if you take a step back as a consumer, right,
Right.
and really put yourself in your consumer or customer's shoes, there's so many other factors that they're considering
Yeah.
when they make a purchase, right, or influences, I guess, that when they make a purchase, and not all of those are due to that ad they're seeing at that moment, right? That might be the final thing that closes the sale,
Mhm.
but it, your daughter's skincare routine was probably driven by a lot of other
Totally.
factors around her, and maybe the Sephora ad came up, and that
Yeah.
was what closed it, but it was a lot of other things too.
Yeah, 100%. All those things you mentioned before, like friends telling her TikTok
Yeah.
videos, or what she doesn't have TikTok, but
Influencers,
YouTube
yeah.
influencers,
Yeah.
walking by Sephora, all those things for sure.
Yeah. And even there's lots of data that suggests even TV, right? I mean, yes, TV viewership and cord cutting has resulted in people, there's lots of data that shows that younger folks aren't watching TV, but they're watching the Super Bowl,
Yeah.
or they're watching,
Yeah.
certain moments in TV, or like sport, etc. And so I think we also just got to remember that there's no absolutes in pretty much anything
Yeah.
when it comes to marketing, and you've got to think about all those other influences as well. Or your kids in the car are listening to the radio and are hearing stuff if they're still doing that, right?
Yeah.
So there's lots of places where we can get marketing influences.
Yeah, totally. Just to build on that point as well, like in terms of like all these specialists happening, part because of the fragmentation of media, part because, and so then the implication is there's a huge increase in, V mentioned this at the beginning, production in terms of content, and then the supply chain that goes around that. Like, from your experience, and you've been in large organizations, that you would have seen probably some changes. What happened on that side of things as the digital channels proliferated? And V mentioned, it used to be just putting a 30-second spot in where we had a TV ad. Okay, we'll put that online.
Yeah. Well, there's been, a huge change in it. For us at CIBC, what we used to do is really start with a big idea, with that was our lead video idea, and then we would craft it for different targets and different mediums beneath. But you could get a lot of proliferation of assets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to really think differently about how were we going to produce those. So, for some, did you invest more in production versus others? How did you think about that? Did you use more AI and other tools to try and automate the production? I think that's true for email. It's true for direct mail. It's true for all those elements. I also really used to push on, just because you can do that asset doesn't mean you should do that asset, right? If you're only putting, $5,000 on that, Snapchat banner, like, is it worth it? Is it going to make a difference for that campaign? And so we had a lot of times where we'd be looking at a media plan and saying, is this really adding incrementally to our reach? Is this production really worth it? Or should we do fewer assets and be a little more focused, and still have a really robust plan, but not have every, if there's 12 versions, like every version, right? So I think that was another choice. And then the final one that I still think marketers are working through is the longevity of the assets. Like, we get tired of our creative often before before our consumers do. And
Totally.
especially if in those environments where we can frequency cap and where we don't kind of share those assets and wear them out. And so I think that's another opportunity for us, is like, how do you bring back campaigns and how do you use them for longer? Because I think that'll also help in your production.
Yeah, that's a great point.
But most of my campaigns, I mean, we would have probably minimum 50 to 60 assets in English and then another 50 to 60 in French.
Yeah.
And that was probably pretty
average.
That, like, I'm sure lots of people would have way more than that.
Yeah. You think about my mind went racing there with what you were just saying, because I think I don't know if it's PTSD that sets in, just like the management of all the content and then managing the trafficking side of it. It was just like an extremely difficult task. But I feel like it came by way of the promise these digital channels were constantly talking about, the optimizations, the over segmentation, this notion that we can get close to as one-to-one as, say, an email can, where you have that explicit consent of the consumer. And it forced us down this path of just like generating as much content as possible without, I think, really taking that step back, or that 30,000 foot view. It's like, wait a second, what are we actually doing here? And I don't think any of us really had that in that moment, that clarity to say, hey, wait, let's pump the brakes a little bit. Yeah. So I'm just curious to ask you, like, when did you come to that realization? It's like, hey, we've gone down a path here that just doesn't make sense.
I think I'm still coming to it. I don't know. I mean, I think it is my belief is it's very situational, right? And it really does come back to what is your marketing challenge and business challenge ahead, and do you need that level of precision, or are you paying for it and creating a lot of cost without the value? Yeah. Like when I was relaunching the CIBC brand, that was a mass campaign, right? Like it by its very nature, it was about educating all Canadians that we were changing. We had some specific stuff for our clients to make sure that they understood the change and weren't concerned about the change, or concerned, but we didn't need to do mass, deep targeting. We were thoughtful about what we did have a strong digital media plan, and we did have, certain targets that we invested in, but it wasn't to the point of one-to-one precision, because we didn't need that, right? Whereas if I'm doing a global money transfer campaign where it's about transferring money to the Philippines or to China, maybe I do need a bit more of that precision, and that's going to benefit me a little bit more. So I think it's really being thoughtful about and being clear on what are you trying to achieve, right? So that you can have that flexibility and that variety and use it for the, one of the things we didn't mention, just to take us on a slightly different tangent, that was positive about the Facebooks of the world, is that it allowed a lot of smaller businesses and local businesses to do some great marketing, right? Sure. And so that, like, wow, I wouldn't tell them to go do a mass campaign, right? That would be a waste of their money, and you can grow to a certain size doing that. But for big brands, you can't keep growing doing that, is my belief.
Well, and to your point about that, like, I think a lot of small brands, there's a shop down the street from me, like a men's store. I'm like, well, you could put a geofence kind of perimeter around your store of, like, say 5 kilometers or whatever, and that's mass for them, really.
Yes.
But it's using some very sophisticated targeting tools that never existed previously, or rarely kind of had the access for small business to leverage. So that's a great point.
Yeah, and I mean, some of the tools that are available now to do content more cost effectively would also help.
Totally.
They're not going to do $1 million production or right? They want a quick static ad that they can put up that talks about their sale or the new line that they've got in or whatever. And I think that type of stuff is really powerful.
Yeah, totally. Just had this thought about when we're talking about content marketing and, like, the channel led, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the path that channels have brought us down from where we were in mass to then where we got to in one-to-one and performance marketing, all that kind of stuff. I think, as much as that applies to performance marketing, I also am curious on your thoughts about content and performance in this perspective of content, because there's this tendency, and I wonder what your thoughts are related to the CIBC brand or P&G, but there's this tendency to go, okay, well, I got a click-through rate of whatever on this ad. Let's do more of that. Or we load in a whole bunch of assets and we optimize for the click-through rate. But then we may not be optimizing for the message that is the strategic objective of the campaign. You know what I mean? They may be at odds. So is that something you've thought about?
Yeah, it is. And again, it's like, it's all about the balance. You don't want to do too much. And I think it depends. Like, look, if my most immediate goal was to deliver the business results, I may sacrifice the brand equity a little to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not ideal in the long term, but if I need that short-term sale, it's like doing a deep discount or a feature. Sometimes that is what you need to do to drive the sale. But I think, I had some good examples when we were doing, our brand relaunch of where what we were trying to achieve and the medium worked really nicely together. So we did, our brand promise was that we helped make ambitions a reality. And, that's a really great fit with Pinterest, right?
Yeah.
That's where you go for your ambitions. You go to talk about the house that you want to have, the vacation you want, the wedding you want, etc. So we did work with them that really nicely connected those two. Their goal about helping people with their dreams and the bank's goal about helping people with their dreams. And I think that was a really nice example of, medium and our equity working well together and helping to build it collectively. We've done, you see a lot now with whether it's sports sponsorships or other show sponsorships that also do that really well, right? Where you're getting that connection between, another thing that CIBC sponsored was Canada's Got Talent, right? Another thing about achieving your ambitions, right? So that connection between ambition and the bank, and other brands do that really well too. So I think those are some good examples of where you can get that connection. But there are going to be times where you need to just get that quick sale, and hopefully those become less and less if you have that nice balance.
You touched on something there with Pinterest, and I was just sitting through a presentation, I want to say a couple of weeks ago now, and they presented that, and they were boasting about it, and I think it's a very valuable insight, but they said that on their platform, users scroll 3 times slower than any other social platform. And I thought that was an interesting take, because it comes back to like finding a captivated audience, right? Like the struggle that we always have as marketers is making sure we have the right content in the right medium in front of the right user in the right time, right?
Yeah.
And then I felt that was a really unique insight, that it's like, okay, wait, then led me down another path. It's like, are we oversaturating a lot of our media plans trying to get across one message across all these different social platforms instead of focusing on 1, 2 that may align closer to what it is our end objective is? But there's this constant, again, like both you and Mark were talking about this earlier, like the push and pull that's constantly happening with this, where I feel like, and again, this is my opinion, but we almost need to nurture some of these relationships with these platforms and just go deeper on an insight that maybe either came from the platform itself, that you create a great experience to create that affinity or familiarity from the consumer standpoint as well, instead of just going like, hey, everyone get a piece of this, or we're looking to readjust the assets to fit.
Yeah, I mean, you give me 2 thoughts there, on that. No, it's a really interesting. First of all, I think Pinterest is doing some really interesting things across a number of different factors. That is one of them. I think what they're trying to do with the, promoting a safer, mentally, like
Yeah.
their focus on mental health. They're, working their algorithm to optimize to the positive versus the negative. I mean, there's some amazing things that they're doing.
I agree.
I heard them describe that they want to do what Volvo did for seatbelts for the
I
social
love that.
media, right? Where everybody sees it as being, a safer place. And I mean, here in Ontario, a lot of the school boards are suing social media platforms, and Pinterest is not one of them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they've got data that shows that you feel more positive after you've been on Pinterest, and they're really pushing that message. So really interesting things that they're doing. And I think you're right. If you want to be a positive brand, that could be a great place to be if your user is there and more engaged. I think the second thought that you raised was this idea of we need cross-media measurement, because part of the reason why we proliferate so much is you're trying to get at everybody, and we can't measure. Well, we don't have unduplicated reach, right? So we don't know, if I reach you on Facebook, am I also reaching you on Instagram? Am I also reaching you on Google?
Totally.
Am I also reaching you on Pinterest or TikTok? And so, that's something that the ACA is really working hard against with the industry, to get to a cross-media measurement approach. There's work being done by the ANA in the US and ISBA in the UK. And I think as an industry, that is going to be a game changer.
For sure.
Because I think then you will have the opportunity to say, I don't need to be on that platform. It doesn't work for me. I also think it's going to be a huge opportunity for local media, like local news channels and everything else.
That's a great point.
Can't wait for that to come to Canada. I think it's going to be a big win.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let us know how that goes, because that sounds super interesting.
I will.
As we were talking about Pinterest, I was just laughing about this thing that V tagged me on LinkedIn.
Oh, right.
There's like this Pinterest ad around lower funnel conversions, and they've got a new ad unit, I think, is what. But anyway, there's like this lava, like erupting volcano, and lower funnel action, and it's pretty fun.
Okay. See, they've been more brand focused, right?
Totally.
So they're now trying to push to the lower funnel, whereas all the others are moving back to the brand.
Yeah.
So again, there goes the back and forth
The
between
pendulum.
the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Anyway, so in terms of like the mixed media modeling is kind of maybe one of those opportunities to help with fragmentation. Are there other things that you think are out there with seeing the whole picture, or opportunities that marketers should look at?
In terms of measurement?
Yeah. As opposed to ROAS. Let's say ROAS is one end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, if we think measurement, I think where we'll end up is their last click attribution plays a role. Media mix modeling plays a role. I think we're going to start to see more test markets. Back in the day where you could get two same markets and really be able to prove what worked, I think we need all of those.
Yeah.
The test markets could give you a bit more immediacy. So I think that's going to be part of the measurement journey that we'll see.
Yeah, that's a good one. Because I mean,
and then other things than ROAS. I mean, at the end of the day, the worry I have with other metrics like brand consideration or ad awareness or brand awareness, I mean, I think they're important, and as marketers, we need to measure them. And I know there's a great tool. I can't remember, Mark, if you shared it with me or if I found it on my own from that Swedish organization about all the different measurements that we have within marketing, and there's 40 or 50 different measures that we could look at depending on the goals. But it's the challenge with some of those softer ones is they're harder for non-marketers to get.
That's a great point.
And to tie to the business. And we're seeing a real trend where CMOs are, you've all read about CMOs lasting 1 to 2 years and the fast turnover because people want immediate business results. So I think the more we can speak to the language of the C-suite, I think that's going to help us as marketers. And, that is sales, right? And so I think it's going to be hard to move away from the ROAS and measures that come out of those types of measurement tools.
Mm-hmm.
Did sounds like you spent some time with some of the literature there from the Swedish Institute. And did you come across the periodic table of like measurement?
Is that the right?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
one I was. Yeah, isn't it? It's really interesting.
It's really interesting, and I think that also speaks to how I think like we went down this rabbit hole, like thinking that we can optimize everything, but at the end of the day, what KPI is actually measuring the business results versus, and I think that they've done a great job. And like for listeners,
Yeah.
we'll add the link to that again. But I think it's really interesting that say like there's really a subset of metrics that we should be monitoring and making sure that we're creating the right education, if you will, within the organization. Like, no, this is how we're going to measure brand query growth because this is what that can do. Here's what the proxy
Yes.
looks like, right?
Yeah.
And be very purposeful with that versus just looking at it in isolation of just like, well, what is the platform telling me? Like, that's just one part of it that I think that, again, we've kind of we missed the plot a little bit because we just try to report it in isolation of everything else that may be happening in an organization.
Well, you bring up a good point of it's not just about reporting, it's about what is that reporting telling you, right?
Right.
And how is that connecting to what I was trying to achieve in the first
Right.
place? And I think that's an important piece that we need to get back and continue to educate people on.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, 100%. There's a guy we had on recently talking about two different asset classes. It was a really interesting point that he made.
Oh, right.
That like brand versus performance. You've got brand on one end that is an asset class that's different than the performance marketing, which has a more immediate return. So longer term returns versus, and so his analogy was like a lot of CFOs approve investments in buildings for a factory.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so not, a cash register on the other end is like, well, if you were going to measure the highest performance return of anything that you could ever possibly do, let's say you're a restaurant, I think it was his analogy, is having somebody stand beside the reservation desk or the client reception and hand out 50% off discounts to their meal that they're going to now. So that's like performance marketing. So if you're measuring something that way, then you're looking at a building, like those both have impact on the business, but you don't measure them the same way. They're a different asset class.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, you led me down a path of like, do you start to capitalize brand spend, right? Is that a different way to think about it, where and you amortize it over time? But I also think there are we used to measure brand investment in MMM, and I was seeing a short-term impact as well as a long-term impact, right? So, and I think it's also just recognizing that you need both and thinking of the time period that you're looking at, looking over it. But of course, you don't want to be, I think sometimes the brand work is delivering the sale and you don't need the performance asset to do it, and vice versa, right? But,
interesting.
That's amazing.
Esther, what are some of the like things that you're looking at that are keeping your interest, like what kind of work you're looking at taking on next and that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of interest in marketing training and marketing development. It's something that I was hugely passionate about in my previous work of helping marketers become better marketers, and I see a lot of opportunities there. So that's something I'm interested in. But in terms of, so that's me personally, but there's also just some really interesting things happening in marketing at the moment that I find fascinating. I was recently at the World Federation of Advertisers conference.
Oh yeah, how'd that go, by the way?
It was really good. I was sorry you weren't able to come, but
been there.
It was amazing. It was a lot of global. There were about 750 marketers there, about 300 from out of the country. So that was really great to get some of that global perspective. And of course, AI was a part of the discussion.
What's
but
that?
Yeah, exactly. What is that? But obviously we've been using that for years with media, and as a performance marketer, you would have been using it forever. But so that was, but a couple of the things that were really interesting that I thought was a neat trend. One was the around accessibility of advertising.
Right.
So they've done a lot of work about just people with who are neurodivergent or visually impaired or hearing impaired, and how we can get advertising to work against those, against those consumers. And it's there's some really cost efficient things you can do. And that is an immediate reach gain, right? So without a lot of incremental cost. So I thought that was really interesting. There's some pieces there. There's a lot going on marketing sustainability, right? And how do you create not greenwashing advertising, but just as an industry, how do we become more sustainable? So that was really interesting. And then, cross media measurement, as I mentioned, is an area of interest for me too, and something that I can't wait to see come into the market. So those are some of the things that I keep thinking about.
Yeah, that's awesome.
How can people find out more about you and things that you're working on?
Come on LinkedIn. I'm relatively active, and certainly happy to talk and meet with new marketers.
Awesome.
This has been great, Esther.
Yeah, super fun to chat with you about this. This is just a really insightful conversation. So thanks for that. Well,
thank you. I really appreciate being invited.
Anytime. We'll have you back at some point too. I'm sure.
All right.
We'll get mixed media modeling figured out.
It wasn't as stressful as I thought.
See?
We didn't bite off your arm or anything.
No, you're very nice. Thank you.
Thanks, Esther. If you like this show, please leave a review. And even if you didn't, we'd love to make this show better, and your feedback will help us do that. All right. I think we're recording. Everything's on. Okay. V.
Post-pod?
Oh, that's a great idea. We should do that.
Yeah, I think it's time to do that.
Let's go. We're recording.
Really, we are. Yeah,
we're actually recording.
Yeah, we're 100%. We're actually recording. What a refreshing conversation with Esther. I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah, same. It felt so much just like talking shop, like with
totally
a friend. Like it was awesome.
Totally. For me, I felt like I was reminiscing the whole time. So, do you remember at the time when we just could do this? And now look at us. It was fantastic conversation. Yeah. What a great guest.
It's good though to do those for a lot of reasons, but I think, like the reminiscing part, you kind of often, I feel like sometimes you get stuck in like what's happening right now and you forget where you came from.
Yeah.
And so thinking about the perspective of where you're at now based on where you came from is helpful.
That's such a great point. Such a great point. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Because you just look at a snapshot, like a moment in time, and then you kind of lose the perspective and context of how you, like, why do we have teams that are structured the way we do?
Well, I think, great segue, Mark. But I think one of the things that I really...
I tried to say, I've intentionally set you up for that. How's that?
Well, I think for me, one of the things that really stood out is like, have we gone into a time where there's an over-specialization of a lot of the core roles that we have in marketing versus the generalization that used to exist? And we relied on the agencies and partners to kind of help marketing teams. And it was really interesting kind of getting into that insight where I kind of tend to agree with Esther on that. I think there's an undergeneralization of roles that could still likely work more in our favor than they do today.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I think it needs to be intentional. Like maybe it's, somebody covering brand. I don't know if you want that label in your organization or not, but generally like, there needs to be somebody that's seeing everything and not just the individual things. It's like the forest and the trees idea, I guess.
I agree.
Yeah. Like the hammer and nail analogy, even. Like if all you have is Google search under your disposal, like the world's going to look like a search engine opportunity for you.
Totally. And I think this is where making sure that you're still somewhat stay as current as possible in a lot of the different marketing tactics, rooting yourself like in things like the marketing effectiveness principles and things that it can really help you remove a little bit some of those blinders that we have on from a day-to-day perspective that really then make us, if someone's a performance marketer, they're just looking at it from that one lens. When it's like, no, you need to make sure that you're creating that mental capacity to think at that 30,000 foot view and making sure that you're leaning on different tactics, understanding the weight of the entire marketing spend or all your media tactics and things to that effect. So, and I feel like that happens over time naturally as well as you progress in your career, but accelerate that. And I feel like that's where we can, be less specialized, a little more generalized to help really kind of build that ecosystem within an organization.
Yeah, even on the specialization front, the one thing that we talked about attribution models like last click and there's this recurring thought that I keep having where, okay, so let's go down that path for a second. We used to like cookies, and you're going to replace third-party cookies with first-party data and all that kind of stuff, with the intention still of being in this position where I know my customers en masse, one-on-one. And so you say that kind of stuff, and you're like, makes sense. Let's do that. More of that, which isn't a bad thing. But then we get to this point where we're also talking about to executive teams, we can do this. We can do these things. We can do one-on-one marketing.
Yeah.
And then I think we had this conversation before. But you go, okay, well, let's take the opposite of that. Hey, you got sun bright in your eyes right now.
This is like crazy.
The solar system just opened up on your face.
My God. Sorry. Didn't mean.
Sorry for anyone listening. V just had this bright beam of sun just right on his eye. Anyway, so you go down this path of like, okay, well, I'm going to specialize. We're going to do this. We can do one-on-one. We can target everyone. And then on the flip side of that, you go, well, let's maybe gut check this. Can we exclude one-to-one? Like, can I exclude this person from my targeting? And let's say it's the executive CEO of your company. See if they have ads that show up after you've excluded them. Because if you can do one-to-one targeting exposure, you should be able to not expose people one-to-one as well. So then there's like, you know what I mean? I think you have to be careful on the promises of these specializations that we have. And that's why I think it's important to think about generalization as well.
You opened up a can of worms right now, and I don't want to go too deep here, but I am so with you on this, Mark, because I look at the cookie deprecation as an opportunity. When we think about being and leveraging your first party data and doing all these great things for a personalization perspective, a targeting perspective, all these great things that, ad tech and MarTech really promise to you. At the end of the day, it goes back to if people have already shown intent in your product or service, your company, whatever, there's a good chance that you've already created a level of mental availability that they already know who you are, and they'll come find you when the time is right.
Yeah.
So it's less about the retargeting, the remarketing side of things.
Yeah.
And that's where like I've done like a whole 180 truthfully, where how to make sure we prioritize things like reach instead. Reach over frequency, right? That was going back to one of our first podcasts with Dr. Nicole Hartnett. She said, I think if you recall, she's like, if you have $2, you invest in 2 homes versus 1 home twice.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of thinking where it's like, great, all the remarketing stuff, cool. You show higher conversion rates, great. They're still a fraction, by the way. Let's not get too excited about some of these conversion rates. It's not like it's a paradigm shift in targeting. However, building that mental availability for someone that isn't in consideration for your product or service right now has a lasting effect in your ability to continue to grow market share.
Yeah.
Like it's really simple.
Yeah.
It's really simple.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's the trees in the forest or the hammer and the nail analogy where you just like, there's this thing in front of you and you're just obsessing about it, and you're letting Google or Facebook or Amazon or whatever the ad platform is tell you what is working. Like they're grading their own homework.
They're grading their own homework.
Yeah, of course.
You have
it's
a
great.
0.3%. Yeah, you have a 0.3% from a last click perspective on all other tactics, and your retargeting becomes 1%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fire up the press.
I hit a nerve there.
I'm sorry. A little bit. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, it's going on the other side. Like Esther had a couple of really interesting points, especially with her experience at CIBC, the bank, and then P&G working there on brand stuff, the brand related side of things, and how I think she had talked about for everyday banking, like they went big on brand and not on lower funnel tactics, because you got to reach everybody. Like, who doesn't need a checking account? To your point.
Based on what we know today, isn't that the right thing to do anyways?
Yeah. 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 It's interesting though, because you could see where there's like all these tools are there in the last 10 years. All the tools are starting to say, well, we can do all these things really well. We can prove this really well. Yeah. This is another one that gets me. Like, if we could prove this really well, well, now you open up a can of worms. Oh yeah, and another thing. but it's true. Like, why, 100 and whatever it was years ago, 120 years ago, Wanamaker said half my advertising is wasted trouble, is I just don't know which half. 10 years ago, Facebook goes public. We were using that just as a proxy for like digitization of retail or marketing departments.
Yeah.
With the promise of we can measure everything. You still now 10 years later, coming up to 15 years later, after digitization, we can measure everything, are still having a whole bunch of people going, I still don't know which half of my marketing is working.
I still don't know. Yeah.
Like, it's maybe you're not asking the right questions.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
More branding. More branding. More branding. More branding.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think there's a really interesting part about that from her perspective. And like, I think P&G type of training, like the discipline that goes into how they do things, is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Because a lot of that is based on reach. Like they start with reach. We talked about that with Mark Pritchard a couple of weeks ago. He's got a philosophy, and that's baked into like the system that they have, where it starts with reach. It doesn't start with anything else. Like it begins with reach, and then and from there, then you build out the rest of your campaign. So if you're not reaching everybody in your target market, you got to rethink why.
I agree with that. Is there anything else that stood out in our conversation for you with Esther?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things related to that, but just like we talked about, hyper focusing on small things instead of like the big things. Like, I think that's again, that generalization. In some ways, I kind of feel like, again, just the thought that I had since our conversation with Esther, but like, what if we just stopped using Google and Facebook to report on performance and started using like the bank account of the business? You know what I mean? And looking at things over time, I think that was an interesting, it was a continuation of that idea. Also, the production requirements now and this content and supply chain of content within a marketing department is massive. It's huge.
Huge. It is. Yeah.
And it requires so much more for people to do. And because now we have like, we could do anything, and not just the flyers coming out once a week. It's 5 pages. We have however many boxes. That's it. You know what I mean? Like, it's infinite inventory. Yeah. So now there's this massive pressure on marketing departments to be able to produce an infinite amount of inventory.
Yep.
It's tricky.
It is tricky.
How about you?
I think the way she ended the podcast, when we're talking a little bit around like marketing trends, what she sees really kind of shifting and changing. It was 3 things that she highlighted: accessibility of advertising, that whole part of it. I thought was an interesting take. Whole notion around marketing sustainability, as well. And then finally, how do we become better on the cross media side of measurement? Right.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are leaning into MMNs, but I know there's a lot of other things that is happening there. So I feel like getting to a state where we are more conscious of the cross media part of our investments, I think will help us do a lot more, help at least get closer to solving that Wanamaker dilemma, if anything.
Totally.
But yeah, I would say those 3 things stood out to me as well.
Totally. Yeah, I thought that was great. And the sustainability part is something that I've never really put a whole lot of thought into when it comes to the advertising and ad tech. But like, it's a big deal. Like, I think, and with AI, it's becoming even a bigger deal. And there's all kinds of stuff around that is really important. I think we should be thinking about, like, if oil and gas is being held to a standard, for anyone who doesn't know, we live in Calgary, Alberta. Alberta, Canada has got lots of oil and gas. So it's a big thing here. It's a big conversation. And it's an important industry, and there's a lot of pressure on them to improve and make bigger contributions to being more sustainable practices and investing in that kind of stuff.
Totally.
And I think it's true for marketing, but I've never really thought about it, to be honest with you.
No. And I think you're right. If you think about the computing power, like even if, let's just use Google and Facebook as an example, like the amount of computing power needed to do these optimizations in behind the scenes, the algorithms that are working behind the scenes, no one's really talking about that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And now you have AI coming in with their ability to generate creative or whatever. I think we should probably be a little bit more in tune of what we could be doing to help on that front as well.
Totally. Anyway, it was a really fun conversation. I thought it
was great.
It was really great to chat with Esther. It was nice.
Yeah, very refreshing. Yeah. Very refreshing. And it was her first podcast.
I know, and she did it amazing. She was awesome.
She crushed it.
Yeah.
Absolutely crushed it.
Yeah, it was really good. I thought, I would have sworn she's done that a whole bunch of times.
Me too. I think she's lying. There's no way she was that good. I've never done it before.
Anyway, that was really fun. Thanks, Esther, and thank you for listening.
Yeah.
Not you, V. I mean, you have to listen to me whenever I speak.
I'm here.
Anyway, so
awesome.
V, what's next?
Catch you in the next one.
Yeah, and
your turn.
Okay, let's go chase profitability.
Let's
do this thing.
Have an amazing day, my friend.
You too.
Ciao.